Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So you and I are in a small community together. And when we were all introducing ourselves, I noticed you had like a tribe of people that were celebrating that you were here. They're kind of starstruck that you were in the community with them. So for those of us that don't know about you and your work, can you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, my name's Kevin, and these days I'm mostly known for my YouTube channel, which just goes by my name, Kevin Powell, where I teach people about CSS, which is a programming language that we use to make websites. One of several that we use, but I focus primarily on that one, and just it's something that people sometimes struggle with or get frustrated with. So my whole sort of pitch is I help people fall in love with CSS, and if I can't get them to fall in love with it, I'm hoping to at least get them be a little bit less frustrated by it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's kind of like go through how you got from where you are today to like way back when. So I know that you were doing some like design work early on. Can you kind of like tell us the backstory that led you to becoming like the YouTube presence that you are today?
Yeah, so I've basically, you know, accidentally managed to get to where I am right now. It definitely wasn't a planned course of action. So as you mentioned, I started in when I my first real career, I guess, was in the design side of things, where I was working at this really small company. It was good in the sense that I had a lot of responsibility because it was this small place. So basically, as soon as I got hired, I was working directly with clients. And sort of learning the ins and outs of the business side of things, which is really cool. But it didn't pay particularly well. So I started doing some freelance work on the side just to try and supplement my income. I had my first child at that point was, very new. So just trying to increase, get a little bit more money to afford everything. And when I was doing the freelancing stuff, most of it was designing websites or UIs and that type of thing. And I'd played around and made websites since I'd finished high school, just as like a hobby thing. I'd do it a little bit, I'd stop, I'd do it again, come back a few years later. And it was always a sort of on again, off again hobby, I guess you could say. And when I was doing the design for that side of stuff, I was like, well, if they're paying me to design it, maybe they'd pay me more if I could also make the website actually into a functional website and not just what it would look like. Um, and so I sort of started doing that on the side quite a bit. I was working a lot with WordPress, making sort of custom themes for people. And then from there, my old school that I'd gone to actually contacted me. They were looking for new teachers. One of my former teachers said I should apply. I never wanted to be a teacher, but because I'm like, that would be less hours and better, more steady income than what I was doing. So I said, why not? And then I ended up getting the job. I started teaching, and I was primarily teaching sort of introduction to web development classes. And then after a couple of years of doing that, which I loved, I was getting a little bit bored of always teaching the same material. So I started a YouTube channel on the side. And that YouTube channel went from being a little hobby project to a side gig to eventually my full-time job.
Mhm. So you mentioned that you didn't want to teach at first. What was it about teaching that you were kind of like, I'm not sure?
It's just never something that I envisioned myself doing. Um, Yeah, my wife's actually she went to university to be a teacher. She was a teacher for at elementary level, and I saw all the work that she'd always have to be doing and everything, and I'm like, that's definitely not for me. And it was just yeah, it just I guess something that never occurred to me as something I could do really.
Yeah. So like, so you had the invitation to be a teacher, which maybe that helped a little bit. How did you, how did you then like take what you're doing in front of the classroom and decide that going into YouTube, like how did you pick YouTube? What was the thought that went into your head? Was it about, was it about money or audience or teaching? Like what drove you from the classroom to a YouTube channel?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really was because I was teaching an introduction class most of the time, and it was just the same material over and over again, which was really good at getting good at teaching that material, and helped me a lot with the YouTube channel when I look back at things. But it was a way for me to sort of keep myself accountable to continue being relevant and not just completely dropping off and losing all the other things and playing around with new things that were coming out, and just it was more of an outlet for me than it was anything else.
Hmm. So go back to like the first video that you're sorry, that you're about to create. Sitting, I don't know if you're in this home office or somewhere else. What's going through your head as you're about to click record on your first video?
So I actually my first, I think it's 6 or 8 videos. I made an entire playlist. I recorded them all, I edited them all, I uploaded them all, and they're still unpublished on YouTube. I never ended up publishing them because I was just
That's
like,
great.
no. Uh, and they sat, I left them there sort of as a reminder, just so I can look back at them. But yeah, I just didn't feel like they were good enough. I really wasn't happy with. So, and I think they weren't terrible, but you know, I just wasn't ready to hit that publish thing. And I think a lot of people feel that way, especially with video. But I think anything, it can be hard to sort of hit that last thing of like, you wrote your draft, you did everything, then actually making it public can feel a little bit scary.
Yeah.
The first one that I ended up actually publishing was just taking something that I saw my students struggling with a lot. Every time I would teach the class, there was the same pain point. So that was the first one that I was able to hit publish on.
Yeah, that's it's such a blind spot I think that we have is like not seeing the problems like sort of right under our nose that we have already taught people. But like before we get into that, what were the first 6 or 8 videos? Like you said, you scripted them, you kind of like had a plan. How'd you pick those versus like then you put them down and went after the navbar stuff?
Yeah, so those ones were actually before they were more WordPress focused, and instead of being about like how to accomplish this for somebody who was learning how to code, at the time when I was teaching, I was still doing some freelance work on the side, and again, it was problems I knew people were familiar with because had all my clients at the time, or not all, there wasn't that many, but there was enough, and it was sort of the struggles they were having with WordPress. So it was just going through sort of the, understanding the dashboard, getting through everything. And I think one of the reasons maybe I didn't publish them was just it wasn't a topic I was super passionate about. It was just like, I see this pain point people are having, it could be a good thing to address it. But I'm really happy I didn't end up publishing them because, yeah, the channel could have gone in a different direction, and I'm much happier with where it ended up going.
Yeah. So this is an interesting point. Picking problems that we're actually passionate about, but also that other people care about. So like, how did you navigate that? Like, did you experience issues when you were first building sites and had like navbar issues and things like that? And that's kind of been your North Stars ever since then?
Yeah, a lot of, well, I think the early content, a lot of it was knowing what other people were experiencing, just because when I was teaching it, I'd be seeing the different struggles. So that's I mentioned earlier that having the channel or having taught in the classroom was really beneficial for the early days of the channel, just because of that that extra insight of having a class of 30 to 40 people in front of me and seeing in real time the different things that would come up and the repeated questions that would come up. And so when I started recording videos, even though it was just talking into a camera, I could anticipate questions because I knew the things that would come up. And so people would even comment on the video saying like, it's cool. Like, I had these questions, but you answered them during the video because I knew those are the types of things that would come up. So I think that helped a lot on that front. These days, it's a lot more a combination of, when I'm building stuff or doing work, and I come across different problems or different issues or whatever it is, and I figure out a solution, then hey, let's talk about that and explore that idea together. It is a big part of what I do, or just as with a programming language, there's new stuff that's constantly coming. I keep saying it's a programming language. You might get some angry people saying that CSS isn't a programming language, but but yeah, just if new stuff is coming, I want to experiment with it, play with it, see what it's all about, and then I'm like, cool, this is what I learned by playing with it, and I share it with everybody.
Yeah, that's great. And so, okay, so you launch your first, you record your first 6 or 8 videos. Those become sort of your shitty first draft. They never see the light of day. But like, mentally, sort of emotionally, what did those first 6 videos do that allowed you to create the first one that you published?
I think they just sort of it got me through that. It got me into like the rhythm of setting up, figuring out how to even do anything. Because at the time, I just got a mic, figuring out audio is a nightmare, figuring out how to record my screen, getting through all like the different parts that I needed there. I think it was getting through the struggles early on, and then also as you're editing and figuring out, I sort of had some experience with editing software, so at least I wasn't learning that from scratch. But going through those early ones, I was seeing things that like, oh, I should have zoomed in on that, or as I was recording, or done certain things different. So I sort of learned. I think it acted as sort of a learning process, even if it never made the light of day.
Okay, so you've launched your first video, your first how-to video now. How do you get the first 100 views on it? How did that all come to pass?
So my story on YouTube is one of very slow growth, especially early on. And as I said, I started it as more of a hobby project, which is a good thing because basically no one was watching anything at the beginning. It was like, oh, 25 views, like that's awesome. I helped 25 people, and interestingly, with that first video, basically I don't think it had any views for a while, or 1 or 2 or something, but it was super low. It was probably my wife or something that watched it the first couple of times. But once the channel actually started getting a little bit of traction, that one actually quickly became my most viewed video. And I think for my first 4 years of the channel, it was my top video, like consistently getting the most views all the time, just coming in through search. Which is kind of funny. It's your first one that you sort of don't really, I mean, it was fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's sort of like, well, things are better now. And you're watching, that first old, not so good video. Especially when it was like 4 years later. And I'm like, how can I not make a better, like, I have better content now. Like, let's watch that other one. But part of it was because it was early on, because I was doing a lot of videos that were just addressing specific issues. It's sort of like, if your toilet is leaking or your faucet's leaking or something, and you're Googling or you doing a YouTube search for something like that. A lot of my content was hitting on those things of like how to solve this specific problem. Mm-hmm. So once search decided that, certain videos were actually good, how the YouTube algorithm works then and now, I'm still not 100% sure. But at one point, I guess, as the video got views and people were actually watching it, that it sort of realizes, okay, people are clicking on this when they search this, and they're sticking around and continuing to watch it. So it's moved its way up in the search. And then that just causes the whole thing to snowball a little bit. The better it does, then it just keeps climbing up and doing well. And I'd never looked into it, but maybe there was like a small gap in search for that specific topic as well. I guess, because for a small channel to be able to get to the top of search results, I don't think is super easy. But for the first several years, that's sort of how my channel grew. And it took, I think, 6 months before there was any momentum at all. And then once that momentum starts, it just sort of builds on top of itself. So yeah, it took a while. But that's one thing with YouTube is I think it can take a while before things start to click. You always hear about the channels that explode really quickly, but consistently putting stuff out, it can feel like you're in a little echo chamber at the beginning. And at one point you probably do want to reevaluate if nothing is sticking, but through like 3 to 6 months, it's really hard to judge where the future might go.
Okay. So you've been at this for several years, and I think what you said is the first 3 to 6 months, it was really not much. Maybe your wife going in there, clicking around some videos. How do you keep going? And what's the moment that you're like, okay, something's happening here?
So yeah, it was around the 6-month point when there was actually like, it went from being scattered views to being like a bit more consistent. It still wasn't massive numbers by any means, but it was like, okay, there's a little jump here. I see, it's trending in the right direction. So that was cool. And then I'm like, that's awesome. And then because I was a teacher in the classroom at the time, and then I was also teaching on YouTube, like it went from being, this video's, if I go in the classroom, I'm teaching to 30 people at a time. And now look at this video, it's hit 1,000 views. Like that's, so, a ton more than what I can reach in the classroom. So like that was a huge motivator for me, just knowing like I can take this and I'm hitting more people than I could just by being in the classroom. And so yeah, for a long time that was a big motivation. It still is a big motivation for me that I'm able to help people out so much. So yeah, that was really sort of what drove it for a while. It took a long time because it went from hobby project to sort of very small side gig. It's like, oh, we can go on an extra date night this month because we got $100 from YouTube or whatever it was, and that was sort of going on for quite a while. But that was it's a nice little bonus on the side for sure. And then just as time goes on, as I said, it's very much a story of slow growth for my channel. So it went from being like just purely motivated by reaching more people to like, oh, that's cool. We got a little bit of more attention on probably.
Right. So at what point does it become almost like past the side gig and this is something that I'm going to stop doing the other stuff and go all in on this? Like what's happening?
So the channel started doing really well after about 3 years. I don't remember my specific audience numbers at the time, but it's probably around then when I passed 100 to 200,000 subscriber type of thing. I saw the momentum. Income wise, it definitely wasn't there, but that's also I did make a course relatively early on, and it didn't do crazy numbers. I think the total sales were about 10,000. But that sort of made me like that was way more than I was making on YouTube itself. And that's when I was sort of like, wait a second, maybe YouTube isn't where I'm making the money from because I'm sort of treating it like as this little side gig. So that I wasn't able to quit at that point and go full time with YouTube, but that sort of set that little thought in the back of my head that like, oh, this could be something that's a little bit bigger. Because I probably sold that course when I had an audience, I think it was around 50,000 subscribers or something like that. And I was able to, do $10,000 pretty good. So I was really happy with that. And it sort of set that thing in the back of my mind, that this is something that maybe over time, if the audience keeps growing, it will eventually become something that is actually bigger.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the course too. So you're growing your YouTube channel. Were you doing anything else like newsletters or anything that you kind of like had a relationship with your audience?
Yeah, I started a newsletter when I started working on the course, just because I'd heard that that's a good idea to have, just sort of as like a waiting list type of thing. So that was the birth of my newsletter, which I've been running ever since. I do a weekly Sunday newsletter that's sort of a mix of, it's gone through a lot of permutations and different things just because as I try and figure out what to do with it, and it might change again, I never know. But it's always been a place for me to sort of share what I'm up to that's not on YouTube, but also just like general updates or thoughts or anything that's front of mind that's somewhat related to what I'm teaching about, just to sort of build a bit more of a connection with my audience and for the people that are interested in that. So yeah, the one thing I don't know is how many people I had on my list when I sold the course the first time, because I don't remember, but it was a while ago. But yeah.
So this is interesting. I think like I think some people get a little nervous that they have to be like on all the channels like right away, right out of the gate. And your story is a great learning lesson because you stuck at it for so long, and it sounds like you were just focused on YouTube for at least a few years before you did anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even I've done stuff on other platforms, and then because it's not a like Instagram, I would try and then I would stop, and then Twitter, I would sort of go on little binges of trying to build my audience and then stop. Even TikTok more recently and other stuff, and I just find I just keep going back to focusing on YouTube. Twitter I am active on just because it's the platform I would have been active on anyway. So sometimes every now and then I'll do a little bit more there, but in general, all of my audience building comes from YouTube as my main focus all the time, because I just I don't know. I find I have trouble like sticking with having too many things. And I haven't seen like these again, maybe it's because I don't stick with it. And as I said, you know, I'm saying stick with one thing and it takes a really long time. And these other ones, I do it for a little while and I'm like, I'm bored of that now. So I don't stick with it. So I'm not following my own advice in a sense, but I also find it easier just to focus on that one thing instead of trying to be everywhere.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's a great lesson because I think that's where I was going with things. I think, you know, we see people that have been at it for 5 years or so, and they're sort of like embedded in lots of different channels. And we think like we have to replicate that right out of the gate in order to be successful, in order to grow an audience. But I think you're a great story in seeing like if you just dedicate it, like once you have something that you're passionate about that you can show up for years, not just a couple weeks or a couple months, but a couple of years, and have at it, solving important problems to other people. You're getting views, you're building your audience there. People are really starting to trust you. And then there came this moment where like you even had a couple 100,000 subscribers, but the money wasn't enough for you to quit doing everything else. So you had this idea that like I could package some stuff into a course. Like how did that come to pass? Like what was that about?
Yeah, so I like going in depth as much as I can and teaching the why and the how. Like, you know, this is why this is working. I don't want to just show you this is the steps you need to take. I want you to understand the purpose behind what you're doing. And so I do it on YouTube as much as I can, but it's on like singular topics and everything's really scattershot, which I guess in a sense like goes to like the whole like my content planning is very ADHD where I'm just all over the place because it's like that sounds fun, that sounds fun, that sounds fun, and nothing's related. And I think it's good for solving lots of things. But then I was like, I want to make something a bit more comprehensive. People want something they can follow from A to Z to like build that knowledge. And this lesson builds on that past lesson and that type of thing. I don't find YouTube's a good platform for that. And people will ask for it and you'll put out a course like that on YouTube and the first video will do great. And then nobody watches the second or third parts of it. It's just the drop off is immense anytime you try doing a series on YouTube. So I figured with a course, the people that are actually investing something, and it, you know, as soon as you invest money in something, I think it makes you, you're sort of, you know, you're betting on yourself a little bit anytime you invest money in something. And I think it was, my hope was that it would be, you know, actually get people to follow through a little bit with all the content. But it was that idea of like having something off of YouTube that I could package in a way that could actually have that learning building up. You have your project files, you have other stuff that can go along with it. So that was sort of the idea there, yeah.
Yeah. How did you pick like the topic for your course and what was going to be a part of it?
So I had just the first one I did, and maybe it was a mistake looking back, and I'm sort of redoing that course now. But I started with a topic that was a bit more advanced. And the thought process was like, I'm covering all sort of the basic stuff on YouTube, more beginner level, intermediate stuff, and then the course will be sort of that next step up. So for the people that have gotten through the early stages and they're hitting that more advanced stage. And also just because it is a bit more complex. And I thought that, you know, being able to lesson plan it and do everything there would be beneficial. So yeah, that was the idea behind the first course. I don't know if I would do the same thing again, though it's a tricky one because I think if you're marketing something, marketing it to more experienced people that are actually working versus beginner content that's for students, you're able to obviously it changes price points and it changes a lot of things. So it is easier to sell higher priced items to people that, you know, if your market is people working versus to students. So I don't know. Maybe it was the right idea. Maybe it wasn't. I'm not sure. But it's what I went with at the time. And it made me realize that it was a viable thing to do. So that was good.
Okay. You said you sold around like $10,000 worth of that first course.
Yep.
So like, what have you learned from course number 1 to course number 4 that somebody listening would like really be interested in taking advantage of?
That there's no perfect way to make a course and that you'll never 100% be happy with it. And it's probably going to take you 5 times longer than you expect it to.
How long? So you're on your 4th course
Yeah.
right now, and it sounds like you just started. So like a timeline of like the work that you've put into the past courses would be great.
Yeah. So I've done, I have 3 courses that are pretty big. I'm trying to think now. I guess I have 5 courses. Anyway, just because I did one that was like a small course. Because the first ones I did were larger in scale, covering like a pretty the path from A to Z was a long way to go. So there was a lot of content that I had to cover to get through it all. Because if you're charging something, I want it to be this big comprehensive thing. You're getting value for your money. For me, that's really important. Like making sure that if somebody's paying for something, that they're getting more value out of it than what they paid for it. Which is hard when you're teaching something that doesn't, you're teaching a skill rather than like something else. It can be hard to sort of equate that. But yeah, sorry. So for those bigger courses, like over a year, each one of them to create. One of them took me over 2 years, I think, to make. But again, it depends. I was doing them part time. Though when I switched and went full time with online stuff or with my content creation side of things, I was like, I'm gonna have so much more time now. I'm gonna be able to create courses and do all this, and like it hasn't sped me up at all. I don't know. Maybe I'm just bad at time management now. I'm not sure. But I'm surprised myself a little bit in the past with creating courses, or how I did it when I was doing it in evenings and nights and stuff. Looking back, I'm not 100% sure. But the one piece of advice I would give is to do a small course to start with. Because I have one small course. My purpose of that course was, here's a very tight topic. I want to stick to my scope, and I want to see if I can actually make a course in like 3 months. And I knew the topic really well, and I was able to do it. I think it took me like 2 months to do the entire thing, which was a huge achievement for me. And I was like, yes, the proof of concept, I can do it. And then now I'm working on another one that's huge, and it's taking me forever. But at least I know it's in me to be able to do something that's a little bit more tight in scope. And I think it can be demotivating when you're working on a really big course, because it goes in fits. Like, if you're working on it for a long time, it comes in like fits and starts, and things get in the way. You have to work on other stuff, then you have to come back into it. It's hard to get back into it. That's the main thing for me that's been a struggle, is like going through those, like coming on and off of something, whereas doing something that's much shorter, more focused, I think is a lot more achievable. So I would definitely recommend going that route for anybody who hasn't made one yet.
Yeah. And also you're a living testament that like teaching live cohorts of people is such a superpower, because you get to hear all the questions. Like it sounds like probably you just had like a whole list of topics that you knew you could create content on. And then the cool thing about the path that you took is that you have a lot of data. Like you have actual data from questions and students coming up to you at the end of class, asking the same question over and over again. Then you're creating content with that. On YouTube, you're seeing like the videos that get the most views. So like you're collecting all this data, and I'm assuming that becomes sort of like a guide in terms of what you then package into your courses. And what I'm really curious to hear is, if you're on your 5th course, it seems like it's working for you. Like you want to continue to do it. I'm just curious, super specifically, did the short course, how did that perform versus your bigger courses?
So that's a good question. My sales for that one were relatively high, but because it was a small, focused on a really niche topic, it was also at a lower price point. So yeah, I don't have the exact, but I think the launch of it, it was charging, I think it was $35 when I launched it for the course. It was about 4 hours of content, and it had about 35,000 in sales.
Wow. Cool.
So yeah, that one, that was when I had a bigger audience. I was a bit better at marketing things. And for that niche of a topic, I thought, yeah, it did really well. It continues to sell, but just at a lower rate now. So yeah, that one did pretty good.
Yep. Okay. So like today, how do people discover those courses? Do you continue to like promote them?
Yep. My main thing is just building. So it's audience building through YouTube to try and get people onto my newsletter. And then through my newsletter, especially when you join up, I have a few different sequences depending on how you join my newsletter. So they'll promote different products depending on where people are coming in from. And then occasionally I sort of, if the topic I'm talking about in any given newsletter is on topic for something, I'll mention it, or in YouTube videos too. If I'm speaking about the specific thing that I address in a bigger picture on the course, then I'll mention in the YouTube video that I have the course. There's always the link to all my courses in the description of my videos as well, and other stuff. So I do try and bring it up. It's one thing, I'm not a good marketer. I've always had successful launches because I had built up my newsletter. I could market directly to my newsletter. One thing I was really bad at was maintaining sales after a launch period. And so that's something that I'm still trying to figure out and work on. That's slowly getting better. But yeah, I need just to be better at telling people I have content or courses out there.
Yeah. What is it about that? Like, you called yourself a bad marketer, which I think a lot of us do. Why are you a bad marketer? What makes you a bad marketer?
I feel, I don't want to come across as like a used car salesman like vibe. It's really not my style. So like saying like, oh yeah, and like go spend money on this thing of mine is always kind of weird. I sort of push my way through it whenever I'm coming up for a launch period, because my launches involve, I send about 10 emails over 10 days, roughly. So that's really like, that's the one time I get really salesy, and I sort of have to convince myself to do it and that it's okay to do it. Because again, I my primary thing is that the value of what people are buying is more than what they're paying for it. So if I really believe that and I believe in my product, I have to be able to sell it to people. So that's sort of reminding myself of that on a consistent basis, is the big thing I try and do. Yeah.
I read, I think Dickie Bush shared that every time they launch with, he and I forget his partner's name, they run 30 for 30 about like content and writing and using AI and things of that nature. And I think he shared that every time they have a launch, it's like a 20 email sequence. And it's like, I know that I'm a self-trained marketer, but I know that repetition is really important because most people didn't even see the first 10 messages. So when we think we're being obnoxious, people are like, oh, I didn't even know you had a course. I have to remind myself of that all the time.
Yeah. I've put up like polls on YouTube asking people if they knew I had courses or not. And it's usually like 75% say no. And I'm like, okay, I just need to say this more often.
Yep. It's a great lesson for everyone listening. When you think you're being a used car salesman, people are like, I'd love to buy something from you. I didn't know you had anything available.
Yeah.
So like, okay, so what do you think is the big vision that you have for this thing? Is it like the kind of business that you want to package up and sell one day? Is it like you enjoy the lifestyle, you're just going to see it through? What are you thinking? I'm
still in the process of figuring out what exactly it is I'm building. It's become successful enough that I can do this as my job. My courses are doing well, and I'm trying to figure out that next thing now. For now, I'm enjoying it. I really think that I didn't mean to get here, but I'm super happy I did, and I'm grateful that I'm in this spot now. So for the time being, I'm just going to sort of try and keep it going. I do need to figure out sort of what the long game is going to be. I have no idea at this point, and I think it would be a good idea to know, because then you could do things a bit probably better than what I've been doing up until now. But yeah, that's sort of the big question that has been hanging over my head for a little while now, and I just keep putting it off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I think like for a long time, like I ran a business that, I thought it was just great just to be a business owner. And it took me the better part of a decade to realize that I was like in the wrong business altogether. And now like I think like what I heard you talk about is passion and kind of like solving problems that exist in the world and people care about. And then sort of like going down the classic path of like making sure that everything that you create for them is 10x the value of what they put into it. Okay. So like, I want to read this quote that's on your about page. I sort of paraphrased it, and I'm reading it because I want the person listening that is looking at you like at the starting line, and they're looking uphill at Kevin Powell, 7 years in, massive audience, 5 courses, newsletter, like success all over the place. And they're like, I'll never get there. So on your about page, you said, I never in my life imagined that I'd have a successful YouTube channel and that people would actually want to purchase courses from me. I never had planned for it to grow into what it's becoming today, into what it's become today. So like, what's the message that someone listening in that wants to, maybe they have like a 9 to 5 and they just want some freedom in their life. They want to like be able to create they've kind of like found a topic that they're interested in, but they're scared shitless to like turn the video camera on or start writing on, whether it's on social or a newsletter. What do you tell them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's just, I mean, it's, I guess, a bit cliched, but like you just got to do it. Like I said, I put up some stuff and then never published it. In a way, as I said, I was happy I didn't because my topic changed a little bit. But even if I had, no one would have seen that content anyway, probably at the beginning. If it's good quality over time, it's going to start, you will start spreading the message. And if it's things that if it's topics people are interested in and want to learn from, it's going to resonate with some sort of audience that's out there. It doesn't matter if it's a huge audience or, especially at the beginning, if it's a small audience, that's fine. And I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people shy away from, is just feeling like they can't put out that perfect piece of content. And I don't think the perfect piece of content exists. I can relate to a certain extent because, well, a lot of people struggle with video. I actually struggle with writing because I feel like when I'm doing video, it's okay when I pause or when I or a little bit. I don't feel like I need to edit it to an extreme because part of, I guess, my style is just I'm trying to be authentic and be me and all of that. So I don't mind if I stumble along the way. That's even learning experiences. If I'm doing a video that's how to do something and I make a mistake, unless it was something really stupid, a lot of the time I leave it in there and show how I figured out that was a mistake and how I fixed it. And people like that and they learn from that. Whereas when I make written content, I always over edit it and feel like it. So, I can relate to that side of things, and in trying to make things perfect, but nothing's ever perfect. And no one is going to judge you. If you do something that's 90% and it helps them, that's all they care about, that they found that piece of information that's going to help them out. And whatever it is, if they can find that, they're going to be happy. And it doesn't matter how you presented it as long as they were able to understand it. So yeah, I don't think there's any reason. I understand that fear at the back of your head for sure. But just getting stuff out there and getting into that rhythm of creating content, because it's not always easy, but if you can just you stick with it, and the more you do it, the better at it you get.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I've had so many people over the years that tell me like, you're a great writer. I'll never be able to write like you. And I'm like, man, you should see the stuff I wrote 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Like, I just happen to have a great, in my undergrad, I had a creative writing professor who our textbook was a subscription to the New Yorker. And like, so I learned how to write by like reading comics and, like posts in there. And I just tried to like replicate it. I followed Seth Godin for a long time. Just loved his style of writing. Another author, Penny, I can't think of her last name, just like a lot of trial and error. And then I sort of like developed the mindset and showed myself that I can actually get better at something with pace. I'm like a kid growing up, I played a lot of sports. So like I guess I had that mindset that like, if I put the time in, like swinging a baseball bat or catching a football, like I will get better at it. And I don't know, there's something about work and creating businesses that we trick ourselves into believing that it's any different, that like we're just born a business person or a marketer, and it's total bullshit. So like
Yeah.
you're living proof that you've put the time in. And like the thing that the other lesson I took away from your story, which I didn't know until we talked today, was 7 years. I consistently have to remind myself to keep going, to think in like years and decades. But still in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, but maybe just a couple months. So like hearing your story of like 3 years until it kind of like moved from hobby to even just a side hustle, like that's the kind of commitment and the kind of reminder that I think we all need to hear.
Yeah. And the other one thing, as you were talking, it made me think of it, but just make sure you're not comparing yourself to what other people are doing either. I'm still like, I'm hoping this year to pass 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and I still watch other tutorials from other people, and I'm like, damn, look at that production quality. Like, I'm nowhere close to that. And, people still like my content, and it's really easy to be like, that person's much better at talking about that same topic than I am, or teaching this, or whatever it is, whatever you're looking at starting your business in, or doing whatever, just because there's other people doing it doesn't, and you think they're better than you at it, like, don't let that get in your head, because everybody's, it's one of those cliched things, but everyone has their own way of approaching something and their own style to it and all of that. And it's going to click with the right audience. And I think, like, don't let that demotivate you just because someone else is doing something.
Yeah, for sure. Well said. Kevin, this has been great. So where can they find you and your work and the courses that you're launching?
Yeah, most of everything is on my website, which is kevinpowell.co. That sort of links off to my YouTube, to my newsletter, to my courses, and everything else is there. That website needs a severe update. It's been a few years I haven't touched it, but at least it links off to everywhere that's important.
Shoemaker with no shoes. Classic. I know.
Yeah, exactly.
I get it. Kevin, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time on here.
It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks.